friends, it's Christy back with you on the Lawn Fawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Critters in the Desert stamp set. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with the two cacti, and for those I'm using G21, G24, and G28. So I'm placing the darkest shade, that G28, on the inner part of the arms and the outer part of the body, and then I'll blend that out with the G24, making sure to go right over the edge of that G28 so that I can pull that darkest color into the midtone so I don't leave behind any harsh lines. And then I'm going to fill in any white spaces with the G21 for a nice highlight. Then I'll move over to the smaller cactus and color that exactly the same. I am so in love with this new stamp set. I think it's so much fun. I happen to love cacti and succulents. I have an entire windowsill full of them, all different varieties, and so this is definitely right up my alley, and I love all of the fun new desert critters as well. I have actually never been to the desert. I've done a lot of traveling. I love to travel, but that is one place I have never been, and this stamp set totally makes me want to put it on my bucket list. So I'm moving on to the agave plants, and I'm going to use some very desaturated blue-green shades. It's BG90, BG93, and BG96. So like I said, these are very desaturated. They have a lot of gray undertone to them, but I think they lend themselves really well to agave or succulents or anything like that. I really love how they turned out. I typically do reach for brighter, more cheerful colors, but I think it's fun to mix it up and do more desaturated tones every once in a while just for something different. So for both of these, I started with the BG96, blended out with the BG93, and then finished with the BG90. Speaking of desaturated tones, I'm going to continue in that vein and bring in some YG90s. So now I'm using more of a yellow green, but still in those 90s, so it's very desaturated because it still has a lot of gray tone in it. I'm using YG91, YG93, and YG95 for the body of my tortoise, blending with the YG95 for the shadows, then the YG93 as the midtone, and the YG91 for the highlight. And then I'm going to stay in this family, but I'm going to darken it up for the shell. So I'm going to keep that YG95, that's going to become my lightest shade now. And then I'll add to that the YG97 and the YG99. So I'm taking that YG99 and adding a bit of shading to each of the plates on the shell, just doing a little curved line, mainly in one direction from the right toward the bottom left, but in the center one I also came up the left side, and then on the top part, that little half circle, I did the whole outer edge. And then I'm going to blend out with the YG97. I think that this shell would also look great in brown tones, but since I was going to be having a lot of brown in my background, I thought I would stick to green for him for this particular scene, just to help him stand out a bit. So I took that YG95 and filled in any of the white spaces for a highlight, and then I'm going to move on to my little fennec fox. At least I think that's what this is. I'm actually filming this before the intro to the Critters in the Desert video has come out, so I'm not positive that this is a fennec fox, but just from Googling pictures, I believe that's what it is, which is actually the world's smallest wild dog. They have these giant ears, and we actually have one at our local zoo, or maybe we have a few. It's been a few years since I've been to the zoo, but I remember seeing these in person, and they are super little. They're like the size of like a chihuahua maybe, and they're very, very cute. I went with the E30s to color him in using E30, E31, E33, and E35. For the sand beneath my cacti, I went with E50, E51, and E53. A little E53 first, and then blend it out with the E51, and then a touch of that E50. And then I'm also going to use some of these shades on my rocks. I'm going to do a mixture of brown and gray on the rocks just to make them look a little bit more realistic, and also just to break up some of that brown because I'm going to have so much brown in the background. I wanted all of these images to really stand out and be able to hold their own against that. So I brought in some warm grays for the rest of the rocks using W00 and W1, just adding a few little streaks here and there, trying to get those colors to blend a little bit better and look a bit more natural together. So I did go back and forth, adding a bit more of that W1, and then I actually went and added in some W3 as well. I wanted them to be just a little bit darker and have a little bit more shadow to them, give them some more substance. And then I added a little bit more of the E51 in there as well. And then for my scorpion, I decided to use the toner grays. So I'm using T3, T5, and T7. Just a little of that T7. I want him to look black, but I don't want to lose his features and his details. So I just added a little bit of that shadow and then blended that out with the T5, and then made sure that I left some room on his face and the edges of his claws for some T3 so it would be light so that you'd be able to make out his face. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of that to my Roadrunner. I did have to Google pictures of Roadrunners because the only picture that I had in mind was the cartoon one, and I knew that they probably weren't actually blue, which they are not. They're kind of like a mix between black and gray and tan. So I'm using that as my inspiration for coloring this. I added my black parts first, and then I'm using E41, E42, and E43 for the rest of his body. And I actually ended up adding in a bit of E40 as well around the eye to keep his face light as well. And just made sure to blend the tan and the black together just like I did on the rocks. I used E44 for the fennec fox's nose, and then I'm giving all of my critters some rosy cheeks with RV10 and RV11. I started with the RV11. It wasn't quite dark enough on the scorpion especially, but also I thought it didn't really stand out very much on the fennec fox. So I am going to darken that up with the RV13. And I took off both lids because my RV13 has always been a bit leaky, so just precautionary measure there. I decided to add a touch of that to all of the critters' cheeks just to brighten them up. And then I'm going to do yellow flowers for my cacti. I'm using Y06 and Y08, just the two shades because it's such a small little area. Then I grabbed a black sakura jelly roll pen and got that started off to the side until it was flowing nicely. And I'll go over the eyes of my critters that have their eyes open, which is just the Roadrunner and the Scorpion. But I am also going to add a little bit of lines to my Roadrunner because it is very like speckled and dappled on the feathers. So I added a few little lines with the black gel pen, and then I also added in some lines with the white gel pen, just mainly in those darkest areas. And that gave it a bit of texture as well as a little bit of personality. And then I just trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink. I'm starting with Antique Linen, which is the lighter of the two shades that I'll be using, and I am blending that all down the left-hand side of that panel. and also down at the bottom. So I'm creating almost like an L shape, which I just wanted to do a bit of a different design for today, something that I don't typically gravitate toward, but it's always nice to mix things up and try something new. So then I'm going to bring in Vintage Photo, which is going to be the darker of the two. These are quite a bit apart, but they do blend nicely if you work back and forth over them. So I'm just adding that right over where I added the antique linen, but not going out quite as far, sticking a little bit closer to that outside edge, and making sure just to blend that out so that it doesn't leave behind any harsh lines or any circles left by that ink blending foam. So once I have enough of that Vintage Photo laid in, I will start to blend back over the edge again with the antique linen, just working back and forth between those two until I have a look that I like. The thing about Distress Oxide inks is that the more ink that you lay down and the more you work back over them in layers, the better that they are going to blend and look. So it does take a few tries, but it's worth the extra effort, and definitely working on a cardstock that has a smooth texture to it, like the Bristol smooth surface, makes a huge difference. Then I want to distress this panel by doing some splatter detail, and first I'm starting with just some plain water, although I think my paintbrush had a little bit of white paint still in the brush. I must not have washed it out thoroughly the last time I used it, so no big deal though. I just splattered that all over the background, let that soak into the cardstock for a few seconds, and then blotted it up with a paper towel to lift up some of that ink to create some white flecks. And I did that a second time to add a little bit more. And then I am going to splatter on both of these inks just to give it some extra texture and movement. And I'm going to splatter that into the white area of the card as well. It's just going to unify the whole panel. So I'm making sure to spray that all over. And using that fine tipped paintbrush gives me super fine little dots. If you want larger dots, you should use a larger paintbrush. But I was going for the small on this particular card. So I will do that until I like the way that it is looking. And then I'm going to go one step further, and I want to add a little bit of metallic watercolor. So I'm going to use this coppery shade here that I think looks really nice on brown. So I'll add a few flecks of that. It's a subtle detail, but it looks really pretty when you tip the card into the light. So I personally think that it's just a nice touch. So I'm going to let this panel dry completely, and in the meantime I'll start to work on my sentiment. I've taken some lawnfawn chocolate bar cardstock, and I'm treating that with the Rabbit Hole Designs cottontail powder tool, and then I'm going to ink up my sentiment with Versamark ink, and I'm inking up "You Deserve the Best for Your Birthday," and I'm putting that in two separate lines. I stamp that down twice, and then I'll coat that with some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder. I just keep it in this big tub to make it easier to pour out onto my cardstock panel. I'll heat my heat gun off to the side for about 30 seconds and then bring it to both the back and the front of the cardstock until that powder is all melted and bright white. And just doing both sides kind of eliminates some of the warping and also prevents any scalding of that powder. Then I'm going to pop an insert into my MISTI to use on the inside of my card, and I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn dough ink. And the little snake and the cake and the hiss is from the Critters in the Desert stamp set. And the word hooray is from the Carrot Bout You banner add-on. And then I'm going to add on the candles and a second hiss, so it says hiss hiss hooray. I can't resist a good pun. So now that the background has dried, I'm going to die cut that using the outside in Stitch Rectangle Stackables, which just takes off a little bit on the edges so that you get a nice border of your cardstock showing and kind of frames it up a bit. I use the same die for the insert as well. So I will glue that to the inside of the card using the glue tube, and then I'll glue the background to the front of the card. It is an A2 standard size card, so it's 4¼ wide by 5½ tall. And then I am going to bring in my images, which I have added foam tape to the back of all of them. So I'm going to start laying these out in that L-shaped design to match the brown Distress Oxide ink that I've already added. So I'm starting at the top with the largest cactus, and then I'm going to put one of the agave, and I'm just kind of staggering the images a little bit to the left and the right to create almost like a little bit of a layered look to these images. So next I'm going to add the tortoise, and I'll add just a little bit of glue where his head is going to overlap the bottom of the large agave. Next I'll add the larger stone, just kind of tucking that under his front feet and making sure it's on there nice and straight. And then I'll grab my fennec fox and I'll add him. I didn't add any foam tape behind his ears because I knew his ears were going to overlap that large rock. And then I'm going to actually work my way backwards now from the bottom right. So that's where I'm going to place my smaller cactus. And then next to that, I'm going to have my road runner. So I'm just peeling off all those release papers, and I've got a little dish over to my right hand side off screen that I'm collecting all of these little backer sheets in so that I can just dump it in the garbage when I'm done. But I've added him next to the small cactus, and then I'm going to fill in any remaining little spots with these smaller images. So I've got my smaller agave plant that I put in front of the fennec fox. I'm putting the smaller rock between the fox and the roadrunner. The scorpion is going between the larger rock and the roadrunner, kind of filling up that little area there. And then I just have my 3 little cactus blossoms. I'm going to put 2 on the arms of the larger cactus and 1 on the smaller. Thought about maybe putting it on the center top, which I think also looks nice, but I decided to put it on the arm instead because I just like the symmetry of mimicking the one above. And then all that's left is to add my sentiment. I trimmed those down into 2 little strips and added some foam tape to those as well. So I'm going to pop those up, putting them at a little bit of an angle just to add to the whimsy of this little scene here. And I think that looks super cute. And that is going to finish off this card. So I will lift that up so you can see all of that detail, catch some of that shine from the copper metallic watercolor, and give you another peek at the inside as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun playing with these adorable critters, and I cannot wait to create with them again. So if you did like it, please be sure to hit that like button, and you can leave me a comment down below. I'd love to read your feedback. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.